What is going on, fellow web developers? My name is TYLERP, and in today's video we're going to be learning to create our own URL shortener. So as you can see here, there's a few I've already added. So let's say we want to go to my Twitter. I have created this shorten. I can click it and this link will take me to my Twitter page. Now if we go back, it works for all of these, like even longer URLs. You can go all the way. You can grow as big as you want, basically. You can add as many URLs as you want. So let's add a new one. What website could we go to? Let's go to the Muddy Wolf YouTube channel. So let's https youtube.com/Muddy Wolf. Let's click shorten, and that's going to add it, and that's down here. You can see it's added it with a little animation, which is nice. So we could go to this by just clicking on this link here, or we could copy this link and paste it wherever we want. So we can share this link with Twitter, with anyone like that, and just pause that so it doesn't blare off my ears. And there you go, we're now on the Muddy Wolf Games YouTube channel. So let's close that, and as you can see here, we could just add as many as we want. And if I refresh the page, these will always be saved because they're in the database. So let's get started. Today's video is brought to you by Cloudways, a managed cloud hosting platform for PHP-based applications. Cloudways takes over all server management and security hassles to let you solely focus on your business. Their custom stack provides performance boosts, managed backups that keep your apps safe, and a staging environment that lets you test code without breaking the live site. Plus, pre-configured Composer and integrated Git make deployments a breeze. And you get a choice between 5 top cloud providers, including DigitalOcean, AWS, Linode, GCE, and Vultr. With Cloudways, you not only get flexibility, but peace of mind. So if you're an agency or an e-commerce store owner, Cloudways is a great fit for all your managed hosting requirements. And I particularly like their slogan too, moving dreams forward. It fits what they do. Don't forget to use promo code TYLERP to get up to 1 month free hosting with $15 free hosting credit. Okay guys, so the first thing we need to do is create a new directory. So I've gone and done that, called URL short, and then we need to connect it up to MAMP. So we need to, I'm using MAMP or MAMP Pro. It's up to you which one you use, or you can use any other service that will provide you with a PHP server for Apache or Nginx, and also a MySQL instance. So as you can see here, this is where it currently is aimed to. Let's move this to the new folder. And you might see there's an index file already in there, but that's just one MAMP has already generated for us. So there you go. It's going to bring us here. We can just close this, go back here, refresh, and there you go. We get this MAMP's index file that it created showing here. So let's just go here. Let's open this up with Visual Studio Code by doing code dot. And that should bring it here. There we go. Let's just delete everything within there and just say hello world so we can see it's working. Refresh, and there you go. We just get hello world. So the next thing we need to do is go into our local host. We need to create a new address, and we need a database. Now in here, we're just going to call this URL short. Let's click create. And there we go, we got URL short. So now we've got this URL short database. Inside of the create table, we need to create a new table, and we can call this whatever we want. We also only need 2 columns, and what we're going to call this is URLs. So let's do URLs, let's click go. And this should now ask us for what table names. Now we need an ID, which could be an integer. Also, we are at 125 there, and it's really zoomed in. So let's undo that, and we're going to turn on auto increment for this. It's going to ask us, do we want it to be the primary key, and we'll click yes because we need it to be the primary key. And then we're going to add in the long URL, which is going to be a varchar of 255. Now this means we can only enter URLs that are less than 255 characters. Now if you need more than 255 characters, you can change it to text, remove this, and there you go. You'll now be able to add as long text as you want. I'm going to stick to varchar because I don't expect to be doing anything more than 255 characters. So now we've got all this. Let's just click save. And there we go. We now have our ID and our long URL. So that's now done. So we can now close PHP my admin. And we've just got down here. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go back into our main, and we're going to need to do a boilerplate here. So I'm just going to press using VS Code !tab to create this boilerplate here. In the document, we could just call this PHP URL Shortener. Hit save. We're going to go link, and we're just going to create a link to a main CSS file, which we don't currently have. So let's create that right now. So over on the right, let's just go here and say main.css, and I'm going to paste in the code for this just because I'm not going to go over the CSS. I'm just going to go over the functionality. I'm just going to show you the CSS, but this will also be available in the description of this video via the GitHub link. As we scroll down, there you go, you can kind of see everything that's going on. There's quite a few just small styles. That's why I didn't really want to go through it all. So there we go, we now have our URL shortener. In here, we're going to create a header. And inside the header, we're going to have a H1, which just says Tylers just Tylers URL shortener. There we go. Now under there, we're going to have a main. And inside the main, we're going to have a section with the class of form. We're then going to have an actual form inside of that with the action of /add /index.php, because we're going to create a new folder called add, which we're going to have another index in there. And the method of this will be a post request. So there we go. So now we've got the method and the post. Now we need two fields here. We need the input for text, which is actually going to take a name, which is going to be long URL. Now you don't have to match this up to the database, but I like to do it for convenience. We're going to give an idea of long URL, and then we're going to say placeholder is equal to e.g, and we can just say https example.com. There we go. So we now have this. And finally, we need one last input of type submit with the value of shorten. There you go. So now we have this. So if we go back to our area and we refresh, you can see we get this. Let's zoom in to 150 so it looks a bit better. Now, if we submit anything here, we could say https twitter.com /Tyler_pods_ click shorten, and you can see it's going to say no request because it tries to make a request to our index.php, but it's unable to. So to fix that, we need to create that file. So let's go add, create a new folder and call it add, and then inside there we need to create a file called index.php as well. So let's go back. Oh, sorry, let's not go back. Let's go to add, and we can actually just write here add URL. But before we do this, we actually need to come up with some configuration. So we actually need to actually connect to the database to start with. So to do that, we're going to go over here. We're going to click on this little add here, and we're just going to call this database.php. Now inside of here, we're going to create a new class-based system. PHP, and we're just going to say class database, and this is where we're going to do all our database connections. So we're going to say private. We're going to give it a host. So we're going to need the host, which would be localhost in our case. But if you're using a web server or a online service, then you'll need your whatever that is. We need the private database name. We then need the private username for the database, and finally a private password for the database. Now we're going to be using PDO to connect to our server, or to our database, sorry, which I think is the best way to go about it. So let's go construct, and in here we need to actually pass through a host. We're going to pass through a database name. We're going to pass through another string, and the string is going to be the user, and finally one last string, which is going to be our password. Now we're just going to set all these values to our variables we've set. So we're going to say this -host is equal to $host, and let's just duplicate this a couple of times. Let's change this to db name, this to user, and this one to password. Now that's going to set all our variables we need up for us, which is great. Let's go under here and let's create another public function this time so we can access it from anywhere. So we're going to say public function connect, and this is going to return a connection string, or we're going to return the connection to the database. So what we're going to say is connection string, because we're using PDO, so we need a connection string. We're going to say we're connecting to MySQL. and the host is equal to, and now we're just going to do dot dollar this host dot, and then in here we just need to say db name is equal to, and this is going to be our database name, so we're going to say this db name, and that's that. That's all we need for our connection string. We're then going to do a try and catch block here, so we're going to just say connection is equal to a new PDO connection, and we're going to pass our connection string. Now we need two more parameters. We need our username, so we need to say this $user and this $pass. Now for those who don't know what this stands for, this is basically the block scope. So this is connected to whatever our global scope is currently, or our current scope, and our current scope is the class. So you can see here it's inside this block, which is adding these private host variables, which basically means if we want to access these, we can't just say $host, we actually have to use the this command to get these variables, which basically brings all this reference to get the variables. And as you can see, I actually only put a $sign, and you might be thinking you put a $sign here, so that means that's variable, but when we're using this, we don't actually need to pass the $sign. So I actually made a mistake there, so I've removed that, and there we go. So now we got the connection. We now need to go connection. We need to set the database's attributes. So we're going to say attributes, and what we're going to say is PDO attribute error mode, so we can get some errors, and PDO error mode exception, so we get an exception when we receive an error. And there we go. You can find all this information on the PDO documentation as well. I'm just trying to go through it so you can see it. And then once we've successfully got a connection to our database, we're going to return connection. Now, if we do have an error here, so we're going to say PDO exception, we're going to pass through an error, and all we're going to do is echo connection failed, and we can do $e, and then we can use the get message to get the actual message. Now I'm also, after we return, or before we return it here, I'm just going to go echo connected successfully, if I can spell successfully, and just hit save there. So there we go. So now in here, all I'm saying is we're connecting to a database, and if we connect successfully, we'll get an echo on the screen, or if it fails, we'll get a fail. So let's go back to our index. At the top here, let's just do a PHP tags, and what we're going to run is, well, we're going to say include, so we need to actually get the file, which is db.php. We're then going to get the database, and we're going to set it to a new database, and in here we're going to say localhost, so we're passing through the host. We're then going to get URLs, which is our our database name, which is URL short. Am I right? Let's go check. So let's go to localhost PHP my admin, and if we click on the URL, it says URL short. There we go. So that is our name. Finally, we need the username, which for MAMP's default is just root. So we're getting the connection. So let's just say the database connection is now equal to database connect. Oh, and there we go. So now we should see on screen an echo from this. So let's go back here, refresh, and there you go. You see we get connected successfully. Now if we was to mess this up, let's just say local, hit save and refresh, you'll see we get connection failed, and it gives us the error here, which is great, so we can actually know the error. So that's fine. Let's go back to our database and remove the connected successfully error, or echo, sorry, because we don't want that appearing on every page. So there we go. Refresh, and now we're connected to the database in our main file. But now in our add file, now we're actually going to start adding to the database. Let's go PHP, and in here we're just going to include the database again. So we're going to say include. This time we need to do .. because it's back one directory, because we're currently in the add folder, and we're going to say database.php. We're then going to get the database connection. So if we go back to index, we can actually copy this from here. Now you could put all these variables into a environment variable or something like that, so you're not showing them directly in the file, but that's up to you what you do. Let's go URL, and let's set this equal to post long URL. So what we're doing here is we're grabbing inside our index file, we actually send through this long URL. And what we're doing, and we send it via a post method. So in PHP, we can use this $_post to get those posted data. And we can use it to get the specific long URL input form. So we're going to get whatever the value is of long URL and pass it here. So there we go. We've now got the URL. We're then going to create a query. So we need a MySQL query string, and this is going to say insert into, and now we need to pick our database name, which is URL, or our table name, which is URLs. And then we need to pass through what the values are we're going to pass through. So we'll be passing through the long URL. We're then going to say values, and this is actually going to be bound to long URL here. Now, you're probably wondering, like, that's not the variable we're using up here, and that is correct. This isn't, but what we're going to do is we're going to use PHP or PDO to actually prepare this statement. So we're going to call this a statement, and we're going to say database is equal to prepare, and then we're going to prepare our query, and then we can go params is equal to an array, which is going to say long URL, which is going to match this value here. So we need to match this after the semicolon, and then we're going to pass through URL. Now we've got that, we can say the result is equal to statement execute, and we can say params, just like that, and then we can just var dump the result on the page. So all we're doing here is we're going to add this new URL into our database. We're going to insert it, but we're going to use a dummy or a binding parameter. And then we're going to basically prepare it with PDO. And then we're actually going to pass through the params to the execute function, which is going to then run. And it's going to use these params to fill in the areas like long URL here. And there we go. And then we're just going to dump everything on screen so we can actually see what's going on. So let's go back to our page here, refresh, although you don't need to. And in here, we're just going to type something along the lines of, let's do the Twitter one again. So we're going to say twitter.com/Tyler_pot_ and click shorten. And there we go. We get Boolean true, which means it's been successfully added to our database. So let's go in here. Let's click URL short. Let's go browse. And you can see in here we got an ID of 1 with our long URL there, which is great, but this won't redirect anywhere, obviously, and we have this ID here. So let's go back. Let's actually list our data out now on the screen. So let's go back to here and back here. Let's remove the var dump and let's actually redirect ourselves. So we're going to say location is equal to /, which is the root, I equal to, and then we're going to pass through database. And we're going to get a function called last insert ID. Now, you're probably wondering what I've just done here. So what a header is the headers you can pass through in a URL request. And we're getting the location, which is the path. And then we're going back to home using the / here. And then we're going to say query. So we're going to pass through a query parameter. And then we're going to ask the database what was the last inserted ID. So whichever one the last inserted one is, and we're going to pass it back as the I parameter here. So now if we go back and let's go back to home and let's do a different URL, let's go actually, you know, let's just delete this one here for TYLERP. Let's just delete it and redo it. So we can go https twitter.com/Tyler_pot_ and click shorten. And there you go. It's nothing's happened. You're like, wait, it's just done anything. But if you look up here, you can see we get the ID of 2. So if we refresh here, we can see the new URL is here and the ID of 2 is entered there. And that is the ID it has passed back, meaning it is working. So that is done for our ad. Let's close our database as well. So now in here, we actually need to get our data. So up here in the just after we've connected to the database on our home page, we're going to create a statement and we're going to say equal to database.query, and this time we're going to say select all from, and then we're just going to say URLs, and then we can get the URLs by saying statement is equal to fetch all, and we can pass through how we want it to return, and we're going to say fetch a sock to pass it back as a URL associated array. So we're going to collect URLs and let's just var dump this on the page. So let's just say var dump URL, hit save, refresh, and we have an error. Now, when we have an error, there is a few things we can do to figure out what that error is and how we can get it. So one of them is if we type in here, we can just say PHP error log, and I can click enter, and that's going to bring up our PHP error log. Now this is on Mac. I don't actually know how to do this on Windows, so I apologize, but on Mac you can write that in. And in here we can have a look at where the error is. So we can see that there was a bunch of errors at 11, 13, 24, which isn't currently the time. We're actually at 11, 31, 35, which is this one. Uncall, call to define undefined function fetch all in here. So it's saying this. Oh, so my bad. I actually forgot the, as you can see here, the bracket. So we can hit save. And now if we refresh, you can see we get the array of the long URL here, and it gives us the ID as well, which is perfect. So now we can actually add another one. So let's just say https youtube.com/Tyler or Tyler Potts, actually, not just Tyler underscore. Let's hit shorten. And there you go. Our array now has 2 elements in it, and you can see them both up here. So let's display those on screen. So what we're going to do is underneath this section, we're just going to say section.urls, and in there we're going to have a for each method. So we're going to say PHP for each, and then we're going to say for each URLs as a singular URL, we're going to get a diff called URL.url, and then we're going to have an ID in here, and this will basically print out the current ID. So let's, oh, I'm pressing all the wrong buttons. Let's just go here equals to. And this is a shorthand. So if I do an equals, that's just a shorthand for writing PHP echo. So you could just write an equals, and we can say URL ID like that. So that'll print our ID. Let's give it another diff with the class of short URL. And now we're going to generate our short URL. So I'm just going to put here short URL for now. We'll actually generate that in a second. Well, actually, we're going to use the ID as part of our short URL. But I'll explain that in a second when we get to it. So let's just do long URL here. And what we're going to do is do an A tag, an anchor tag, and we're going to pass through an equals URL long URL. Pass that through. And then we're just going to set the target equal to underscore blank, so it opens in a new tab. And then we'll pass through the long URL. So we're just going to say URL long URL, and there you go. What's the error? Oh, I actually added an L there by accident. There we go. So there we go. We have now this, which should repeat. Obviously, we need to end our for each loop, so we're going to say end for each, just like that, and that should now be ready to go. So let's go back here. Let's refresh, and there you go. You can see this is where our short URL will be, but we've also got our long URL, which we can click, which opens in a new tab. So there you go. So we can see the ID on the left here as well. So we've got ID 3 and ID 2. So how is the short URL going to work? So what we're going to do is we're going to add another anchor tag here. Now this is going to be equal to a href of http/localhost, and we're going to say /r, which is going to be our redirect, and we're going to say equal to a C, which is going to be our code or our shortened code, and we'll set this equal to our URL ID, and you can also generate a custom code that you save to the database when you actually save them and use that instead, but I prefer to use the ID because it's randomly generated and it'll always be different. So there we go. So we've got, it's not randomly generated, it's incremented, should I say. And then we're going to set this also to target blank, and we're going to set the URL to http. We're going to get our current URL, which is localhost /r, and then we're going to pass through C, and we're going to actually we could have just copied that and pull it here. So let's just delete that there. So there we go. We now have our URL pasting. So if we refresh, you can see we now get this. But if we click this, we're going to get URL not found because we haven't set up R yet, which is our redirect. So let's go do that. Also, let's remove the file dump from the top up here because that makes it look kind of ugly. So now in our file structure, we want to create a new folder and file. So we're going to say r/index.php. Now the reason we're using index is because web surfers normally look for index as the root, meaning we can just do /r and it would get the index file anyway. So we don't have to write /r index. So once we're in here, we need to do the exact same connect to database script. So let's paste that in. We then need to get the ID, which we've passed through, which is equal to underscore get. And we're going to say C, which is the ID we're passing through. We can then say query is equal to a new select all from URLs where ID is equal to, and this time we're going to do another ID. And then we're going to limit it to 1, so we only ever get 1 back, because we only ever need 1. So if there is ever multiple, which there should never be, it'll only get the first one back. So in query, we're going to say statement is equal to db prepare, and we're going to pass through query. And then we're going to give the params, which is going to set it to a new array. And we're just going to say ID is equal to ID. Just like that. And then we're going to obviously run our statement, execute, and we can pass through the params. And then we can get the URL, which is going to be statement fetch, which is going to get our URL. And then we're going to run a header. And this is how we're going to relocate. So we're going to say dot URL long underscore URL. So what we've done here is we're saying we're gonna look in our database. We're gonna get the ID we pass through when we find it. We're gonna look in our database for the a URL with the ID we've passed through, and then we're gonna set our params. We're gonna execute this query right here, and then we're gonna fetch our URL. Now that URL is gonna be matching one of these URLs in here. And then we're going to get the long URL and we're going to redirect the user to that URL. And that is how the whole redirection works, which is straight and very basic. So there you go. Now, if we actually go back to here, we should, if we refresh, be able to click on one of these and we get an error. Again, we can figure out what the error is. If we go down here, what's the current time? 11:38. And here we go. So we're going to say, okay, so straight up, the error is I forgot to do .. because we're in a different directory. We're actually nested in one. So if we refresh again, you can see it redirects us to TYLERP. So let's close that and let's click on this one, and it takes us straight to the TYLERP YouTube channel. And there you go. So we can add a new one now. Let's say https:/, and let's go to what one could we do? tylerpots.co.uk, click shorten, and now I have a short URL I can share with people. If I hit that, you can see it takes me to my currently not developed website, and that's good. And you could also, when you do this, you could actually add in some sort of analytics to this. You can check how many times people have gone to that link and clicked that specific link. You can check how many people have, where they've come from, either Twitter, YouTube, where they found the link. And you can share these links with anyone. You just need to put this up. Obviously, they won't be able to go to localhost C4, C2, C4, whatever it is, because, well, that's on your local machine. So you'll need to put this on a website to obviously get it to work. But for us, it will work perfectly fine. There you go. We can move around, which is awesome. So, guys, that is going to be the end of this video. Now, if you've enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, smash that subscribe button, and that is it for this video. Thank you for watching, and peace out.